Gregory Morgan's 60th birthday dinner at Belmont Steak and Wine. Everyone was eating and drinking, except me, the adopted son. When the $3,270 bill was brought out, Victoria threw it at me. "Who are you sitting here for?" "Pay." The leather folder slapped the linen with a tiny thud, but the sound cracked through me like a whip. Candlelight turned the steak knives into little spears, the crystal stems into cold eyes. I heard my own breath snag. Around us, silverware paused, conversations hiccuped, then resumed in that Seattle way, polite, curious, pretending not to stare. A quartet in the corner slid from Sinatra into something soft and forgettable, as if the room itself wanted to duck beneath the tablecloth. Victoria smirked, her lipstick the color of fresh bruises. "Come on, Rach," she cooed, tilting her head so her chandelier earrings swung. "You've got that big client now. Consider this your contribution." Her nails tapped the total like a judge's gavel, 4 digits and a comma that could fell a month of my rent. "Victoria," I said, my voice sanded down to keep from splintering. "This is Dad's birthday." The word Dad came out reflexively and tasted of old tin. Patricia's smile tightened. "Sweetheart, don't make a scene," she murmured, smoothing the air with her manicured hand. "We're celebrating." She didn't look at me when she said it. She looked past me, the way you do at a window when you don't want to meet your own reflection. Gregory angled his napkin just so, as if symmetry could tame the moment. "Your sister's right," he said, the word sister tossed like a dog treat in Victoria's direction. "You're doing well now. It's time you gave back. Gave back. As if kindness is a debt that grows interest the second it touches your skin. As if a bed and a plate and 2 decades of being reminded I was lucky to breathe their air had been a loan shark's ledger creeping toward my throat." The waiter hovered with professional neutrality. "Shall I leave that with you?" he asked. "I'll handle it," Victoria said, pushing the folder closer to my plate as if it carried her perfume. She winked, audibly. "Big girl pants, Rach." I could have laughed if my mouth would move. Big girl pants. Funny, coming from the woman whose first job had been marrying a man with a yacht. I slid my fingers under the bill, felt the heat of humiliation rise until my earrings were hot against my neck. The numbers blurred, swam back into focus. It might as well have been a ransom note. No one said a word for me. Kenneth checked his phone. Patricia aimed her smile like a tranquilizer dart at the other end of the table. Gregory raised his glass to the guests who had drifted over earlier to shake his hand, to admire the balloon arch the staff had erected, to tell him he didn't look a day over 55. I caught my reflection in the water glass, lip gloss faded, mascara holding the line, jaw locked like a vault. The outsider's face I'd been issued at age 5 and would wear until it cracked. "Can we split the check?" a voice asked, steady, cultured, and cool. Grandma Dorothy didn't raise her tone. She didn't have to. The waiter turned, as if pulled by wire, and so did the air. "The table can be divided, of course," he said. "How would you—" "Itemize by seat," Dorothy said, "and put Ms. Morgan's portion on mine." My head snapped up. Dorothy's eyes were Winter Lake, beautiful and not for swimming. She hadn't touched her dessert. She had not, the entire evening, touched a conversation she wasn't compelled to, either. She had watched. She had counted. She had listened to the little cruelties that collect like ice behind a dam. Victoria's mouth tilted. "Grandma, please," she laughed, the laugh that always collided with me like a glass door. "Rachel is always taking and never giving. We're just teasing. Dorothy dabbed the corner of her mouth, the napkin crisp as a contract. I don't tease with money, she said, or with people. She looked at me, not through me, and in that small correction I felt the floor steady. The waiter disappeared with practiced speed. I leaned in, searching her face for performance and finding none. You don't have to, I began. They just showed me who they really are, she whispered. It wasn't contempt. It wasn't pity. It was a ledger balanced with truth. My heart flinched, a small animal hearing a door lift on rusty hinges. The quartet drifted in to fly me to the moon. Someone at a neighboring table laughed too loudly at the wrong joke. I slid my credit card back into my purse with fingers that had stopped shaking. Rachel, Gregory said, lifting his glass again as if nothing had shifted. Make a toast to your old man. My throat bobbed. I stood, because you learn to stand when you are told to stand. The room turned its face toward me. The balloon arch, the funny hat someone had distributed for photographs, the candle flicker kissing the wine. To Gregory, I said, and let the vowels lie flat. May tonight be exactly what it looks like. Victoria clapped, delighted by the shape of a sentence she hadn't tasted. Kenneth snorted. Patricia's eyes narrowed 1 millimeter, a woman who recognized a knife point under a napkin. The waiter returned, place-setting the divided copies with a magician's flourish. Dorothy slid her card forward for mine and, with the smallest nod, for her own. I watched the tiny tremble in her hand, the tremble of age, not uncertainty. She had made decisions that built empires. She was making another one. Victoria reached for her glass. Pinot Noir, full-bodied and convinced of itself. Honestly, Rachel, she said, the melodrama. Her wrist flicked, as thoughtless as a blink. The wine leaped, a dark arc across white linen, along the curve of my dress. A slash of burgundy blooming over my lap. Cold, then warm. The table inhaled. Oh, Patricia said, hands fluttering a beat too slow. Accident. Watch it, Gregory muttered, not at Victoria but at the stain defacing his curated evening. Kenneth laughed, a small, mean sound lodged between his teeth. I stood very still, letting the wine map me, feeling its sticky claim. The quartet faltered, then continued. The waiter caught my eye with the quick sympathy of a man who had watched too many birthdays detonate. He handed me a stack of linen napkins. Club soda, he whispered, and vanished again. It's silk, Victoria said helpfully, smile sugar-glazed. You should be more careful what you wear, Rach. Grown-up places are unforgiving. In my chest, something unclasped. Not rage, not yet. Something quieter, harder. I remembered the first cheap dress Patricia had bought me for a middle school recital. The way she'd looked at it, not at me, and sighed that the hem would have to be let out later. I remembered polishing Kenneth's hand-me-down shoes for a dance I was never invited to. I remembered the way being grateful was supposed to erase the ledger of contempt. Dorothy's chair scraped softly as she rose. The room noticed. It always notices when someone who matters decides to stand. She placed a hand on my shoulder, her palm dry and firm, the weight both anchor and benediction. Fresh linens, please, she said to the air, but her eyes stayed on mine. I pressed the napkins gently, blotted. Burgundy turned to pale pink, then to memory. The bill returned. Dorothy signed without ceremony. I watched the arc of her pen, the flourish that ended a line and began another. The waiter thanked her, thanked us, asked if there would be anything else, and I understood there were entire lives where the answer to that question had never been yes. The table resumed its theater. Patricia declared the creme brulee under-torched. Gregory announced Tuscany as their next vacation, his vowels rich with olive groves he hadn't yet rented. Kenneth practiced a story about his promotion for people he would text later to confirm they had heard it. Victoria sniffed, positioned her wrist for a photograph no one would take. I folded the stained napkins, stacked them neatly, an altar of small control. In the mirrored wall, my face no longer looked blurred. It looked like a person preparing to step out of the frame. Dorothy's driver appeared at the edge of my vision, the restaurant's manager in his wake, both of them wearing the expression of men who had been quietly told to take care of things. Dorothy tapped the table twice with the pad of her finger. Court adjourned. Gregory protested something about coffee. Patricia sighed about tomorrow's Pilates. Victoria rolled her eyes, the way a queen might at a servant who forgot to curtsy. Dorothy turned to me with the same calm she had walked in with, the calm of tide and contracts and women who had learned to endure until endurance became strategy. Dorothy invites Rachel to eat dessert somewhere else. A strange invitation, like opening a new door. I have a guest room in Madison Park. You can stay there if you'd like, Dorothy says amid the smell of early coffee. The morning after the restaurant felt unreal, as if the night had been a fever that left a clarity ache behind. Steam curled from the French press on Dorothy's marble island, drifting past a vase of white tulips and out to the windows where the lake lay flat and pewter. I was still in yesterday's coat, holding it closed at the collar like a child clinging to a life vest. Dorothy poured, slid a mug toward me, and waited as if the silence itself were a test I had already passed. Madison Park wasn't just a house. It was a statement written in cedar and glass. From the foyer, a staircase rose in a clean sweep, its banister gleaming, portraits spaced with museum confidence along the walls. I noticed one immediately. Dorothy, at the center of a line of executives, everyone a decade younger, everyone angled subtly toward her. A Hayes Biotech logo anchored the background. She wasn't smiling. She was claiming the camera. Power had a posture, and I could see it. Thomas appeared without sound, the kind of man who could stand beside a storm and straighten its lapels. "Your room looks over the water," he said, hands clasped politely. "I'll bring up fresh towels." His voice carried a note I'd heard from him before, care that never announced itself as charity. "I don't want to intrude," I said, hearing the apology my life had taught me to lead with. Dorothy stirred her coffee. "You aren't intruding. You were invited." She nodded toward the portrait. That was taken the year I went public. Patricia hated that picture, said it made me look severe. The word hung between us, smelling faintly of perfume and old fights. I told her a woman who signs payroll is allowed to look however she pleases. Thomas cleared his throat. "I'll set a key on the console," he said, and drifted away. His presence left the air tidy. I followed Dorothy down a hall where the rugs softened every step, and the windows framed the water like moving paintings. She showed me a guest room washed in pale light, a bed with a quilt that made you think of hands, a writing desk that wanted to know your secrets, a bay of windows where gulls crossed like punctuation. My suitcase looked small on the bench, as if unsure it had permission to sit. "I can't pay you back," I said, fingers whitening on the leather handle. Dorothy sat on the edge of the bed. "You keep saying that as if I'm running a ledger on you." She patted the quilt. Come, sit. Tell me what last night did to your bones. I told her the short version, because the long version had too many splinters. How the bill landed like a verdict, how I stood, how I smiled, how the wine found me, how silence becomes a family's common language when cruelty is fluent. I didn't tell her about the small girl I had been, listening for footsteps that meant permission to exist. I didn't have to. Dorothy's face said she could hear them. Do you know what I learned running a company? She asked. A mission statement is only real if you can see it when no one's filming. Families have mission statements too. They just don't write them on walls. What's ours? I asked, bracing. She looked out at the water, where a sailboat cut a white stitch into the gray. In the Morgans' case, control and appearance. She turned back. When I was raising Patricia, I mistook proximity for love. I thought putting food on a table meant I had set a place for her heart. Turns out, I was feeding her entitlement, and she fed it to her children. You fought? I asked carefully. Once? Dorothy's mouth tilted. 1,000 times. But there was one fight that mattered. When I made her head of the foundation for a year to test her discipline. 6 months in, she treated it like a purse. I took it back. She never forgave me for choosing the mission over her whims. Dorothy's fingers laced, old bones forming a steeple. Thomas was there. As was I, Thomas said from the doorway, a soft knock preceding him. Mrs. Hayes is being modest. She pulled the whole operation back from the brink that day. He set the key on the console, then added, almost to himself, the people who win with rules tend to hate the rules. Dorothy gestured to a chair for him. He remained by the door, a sentinel with a smile. I've watched a great many children raised by people who wanted ownership more than responsibility, she said. Adopted, biological. Labels are just new collars when the leash is the same. She sipped, then placed the cup down with a small, decisive sound. Tell me about your work, Rachel. The question hit me somewhere unarmored. I told her about the small studio I'd carved out of a rented place above a bakery, about the juggling act of invoices and inspiration, about the way color could persuade when argument failed. I told her how I loved taking a brand that talked too loud and teaching it to speak human. I told her about the client who had sent a handwritten note when the campaign landed. I didn't realize, until she looked at me with that Winter Lake softness, that no one in my family had ever asked me to talk about the thing I built from thin air. Good, Dorothy said. Keep your contracts clean, your taxes cleaner, and your passwords written nowhere. When people start a war against your character, detail is your shield. Thomas nodded approval. We'll set up a locked drawer for your files, and a pot of Earl Grey for the late nights. Thomas collects lost causes, Dorothy said dryly. Only the worthy ones, he replied. Dorothy stood, motioning me to walk with her. We passed another portrait, this one of a younger Dorothy shaking hands with a woman in a lab coat, both of them laughing like co-conspirators. The house felt full of a life lived toward something. On the landing she paused, the serious light returning to her face. They think they own you because they raised you, but love doesn't come with a receipt. The sentence found its mark like a needle that knew exactly where the wound had been waiting. I realized then what had been buzzing in my ribs since last night. Not fear. Not even grief. Possibility. The kind that stretches when it breathes. Walter will come by this afternoon, Dorothy went on, the moment folding back into logistics. He's my attorney. Discreet, surgical. He'll want to be sure you understand your options, and he'll want to understand you. She glanced at me sideways. He's very good at listening for what people don't say. I've spent a lifetime not saying things, I answered. That's about to change. Dorothy's smile was small and private, like a shared password. We toured the library, dark wood, soft lamps, a ladder on brass rails, and the sunroom, where succulents sat like little astronauts under a skylight. There were empty spaces, too. Places where pictures had been taken down and the paint had faded rectangles. Absences speaking in tones only a house can manage. Was there more art? I asked. Some pieces left with their owners, Dorothy said, and the word owners held a complicated echo. Some went to the foundation. Some. Didn't feel right anymore. When Walter arrived, he looked exactly like a man you'd want in a fire. Mid-40s, tie loosened just enough to mean business, eyes that filed everything. He shook my hand with an attentiveness that felt like respect rather than measurement. Ms. Morgan, he said, I'm here to help you think, not to tell you what to think. We sat at the desk in the library. He asked good questions and never once glanced at his watch. He traced timelines, drew boxes around the places where my family's generosity had come with small print. He never said the word lawsuit, but the air knew it was in the room, straightening its cuffs. While Dorothy and Walter talked through documents, I wandered to the far bookcase, fingers trailing the spines of biographies and case law and a surprising number of poetry collections. A lower shelf sagged slightly under the weight of albums with cracked leather covers. I pulled one halfway, then another. Dust lifted, sweet and dry. Thomas? I called gently. He appeared with the speed of a wish. Yes, Miss Rachel. Are these house histories, he said, deferential but not evasive. Scrapbooks. Correspondence. Mrs. Hayes keeps her life where she can see it. May I? You may, he lowered his voice. Some of it will be difficult. Some of it will be a relief. I carried a stack to the window seat. The first album opened to crisp penmanship and photographs mounted with careful corners. Dorothy as a girl. Dorothy in a lab. Dorothy with a newborn whose eyes already calculated angles. Tucked among the pages were envelopes, cream, gray, airmail blue. One, brittle at the edges, had been sealed and resealed enough times to tell you it held a heartbeat. I turned it over. The handwriting stopped the room. Rachel discovers an old envelope that says, Trust Fund, Rachel Morgan, $750,000. Rachel opens the envelope, sees the transfer statement. For Rachel's education, managed by Gregory Morgan. Balance equals $0. I stared so long the numbers seemed to bleed into the paper. The statement had dates, like fence posts running across my childhood. Deposits made when I was 5, 6, 7. Withdrawals stepping up neatly through my teens. The final line was a blank floor, 0, like a mouth closed after swallowing. Rain ticked at Walter's window, as if Seattle had decided to be the metronome for bad news. His office smelled of wool and photocopy toner, of someone who kept coffee strong and emotions organized. He slid on reading glasses and took the papers as if receiving a delicate instrument. Dorothy sat beside me, cane hooked over her chair, jaw clenched. She had dressed for war in a simple black suit. "Walk me through how you got this," Walter said. "In a scrapbook," I answered, still hearing the faint rasp as the envelope opened. "Filed between a photo of Dorothy and a letter about the foundation." Walter nodded once. Originals, postmarks, banking stamps. He laid the statements on a blotter, aligning the corners until they obeyed him. "The fund is titled in your name, Rachel. The manager, Gregory. The purpose, education and care." "But it's gone," I said. The words stuck to my tongue. "Not gone," he murmured, tapping a column. "Moved." Rain streaked the glass in thin silver ribs. Outside, umbrellas floated like dark mushrooms. Inside, Walter began to draw a timeline with a legal pad and a pen that whispered over the paper. "Here, payment to an institution. Here, transfer to a brokerage. Here, tuition to Westbrook University." He looked at me gently. "That's not yours." "Victoria's," I said. My ribs tightened like a belt. "Her private university." Dorothy leaned forward. "Say it plainly, Walter." He did. "Gregory used the trust designated for Rachel to pay Victoria's tuition." He turned another page. "And additional charges that read like living stipends. Note the memo lines: family expenses, household." The pen paused. "There's also a disbursement that correlates with a vehicle purchase the year Kenneth turned 16. A fizzing noise filled my ears, like an old TV searching for a channel. My mind leapt backward to my 18th birthday, the envelope I handed to Patricia, a printout from the design school, the scholarship I'd scraped together, the tuition gap I couldn't bridge. Her mouth had softened into that professional sympathy, the kind she used on waiters. "Honey, we just don't have it." "Times are tight. Be practical." I remembered how "be practical" had sounded exactly like "be smaller." "They turned charity into theft," Dorothy said. The sentence landed like a judge's gavel. Her cheeks held the smallest bloom of color. Her eyes had gone Winter Lake again, ice forming from the center outward. "My grandchildren were taught to live on other people's goodness and call it virtue." I pressed my palms to my thighs to keep from shaking. "Maybe there's an explanation," I offered, the old reflex flaring up. "Protect the story so it harms you less. Maybe oversight." Walter shook his head. "Oversight does not sign tuition checks to the wrong student." He slid another sheet forward, tapping a signature. Gregory's flourish. Precise. Proud. "This is misappropriation, Rachel." "Civil. Potentially criminal, depending on state statutes and the trust's governing language." "Criminal," I repeated, though the syllables felt too heavy for my mouth. Dorothy's voice gentled. "This is what happens when you're raised to believe that love is an invoice and children are assets." She covered my hand with hers. "You're going to be tempted to let this lie because the river of it runs through all your old rooms." "Don't. I don't want a circus," I said. "I don't want us on television." Walter's gaze stayed steady. "We don't start with television. We start with facts. We start with letters and filings and protective orders. You can be quiet and still refuse to be silent." "I'm tired of choosing between screaming and disappearing," I said, softer than I meant to. Dorothy turned to Walter. "What are her options?" "First, we secure the documents," he said. "We make certified copies, archive originals. Then we petition to compel accounting from Gregory as trustee or manager, if that's the capacity he held. We notify the bank. We build a forensic map of every dollar. We do not accuse in public until we can prove in court." He looked back to me. "And you, Rachel, you do not apologize for existing while we do it." Words rose in my throat and tangled. I wanted to tell them I had learned to make myself small because the rooms I lived in had only small oxygen. That sorry had been a currency I spent to keep the peace. Instead, I nodded, because nodding had often been my raft. Dorothy squeezed my fingers harder until I felt bone. It hurt in a way that made me feel real. "Walter," Dorothy said, tone shifting into the register that built companies. "Begin the petition. Freeze whatever can be frozen, and schedule medical evaluations for me, cognitive, comprehensive. I want 3 separate physicians documenting that my mind is sound." Walter blinked once, then understood. "You're anticipating a challenge to your capacity." "I'm anticipating cowardice," she replied. "If they can't defend their deeds, they will attack my mind." I looked between them. "Dorothy." She faced me fully. "I will not have them call my clarity cruelty, nor my love a delusion." Her voice cut cleanly. "And I will not have them hold you hostage with the story that you owe them for breathing." A breeze of fear lifted the hair on my arms. "What are you going to do?" "What I should have done a year ago," she said. "The board will grumble. The cousins will gossip. Patricia will combust. But I won't leave this world with my legacy feeding the very entitlement that starved you." She reached into her bag and pulled out a slim leather folio, the kind of object that made people say yes. "I'm rewriting my will. I'm leaving my shares to you." The room tipped slightly, like a boat catching a wave. "Dorothy, no. People will think." "They already think," she said, not unkindly. "Let them. I'm not rewarding blood. I'm rewarding character. You built a life with tools they refused to hand you." She looked to Walter. "Draft the instrument. We'll execute it this week." Walter nodded, already making lists behind his eyes. "We'll also set up a transitional trust, emergency access accounts, and an oversight committee to satisfy the board. I'll call Dr. Sue for the cognitive evaluations this afternoon." My name felt like it had changed shape in the air, a sound with edges. I wanted to protest that I didn't know how to hold something that large without dropping it. I wanted to confess that when people stared at me, I forgot where my hands were, but I also remembered the 0 in the balance column. A child's future, erased with a signature. A door closed on an education. "Be practical," Patricia had said. I had been practical enough to starve my own hope. "Rachel," Dorothy said softly, "you can choose quiet, but you cannot choose pretend." "Justice isn't optional," I heard myself say, as if the sentence had been waiting in the hallway for me to open the door. Dorothy's mouth softened. "There she is." Walter gathered the papers, slid them into a fireproof envelope. He handed me a copy. "Read these tonight." "Let grief come through the same door as anger. Don't lock either out." He stood. "I'll have drafts tomorrow." We moved to the lobby. The rain had thickened. The glass whispered under it. Thomas was there, somehow exactly when needed, coat over his arm, eyes taking in everything and announcing nothing. Dorothy steadied herself on his offered elbow. The world felt taller than it had this morning. The ceilings higher, the fall greater if I missed a step. Dorothy paused at the threshold and looked at Walter. We'll need a secure file room at the house, off the main hall, and a new alarm code. Walter nodded and made a note. Dorothy turned to Thomas. Keep every record safe, Thomas. Every single one. I have rewritten everything, Dorothy says at the family meeting at Madison Park. My company, my estate, my name, it all goes to Rachel. The drawing room seemed to inhale. Firelight licked the marble. Rain threaded the garden beyond the windows, and every breath in the circle landed like a card turned face up. Walter stood near the mantel with a folder tucked against his ribs. Thomas had shut the doors and vanished with the soft discretion of a man who knew when a family would forget the existence of witnesses. Victoria's chair squeaked. She shifted, eyes bright and wet, a cornered animal measuring the distance to every exit. Patricia sat so straight, the pearls at her throat looked strangled. Gregory folded his hands over his knee, as if he were moderating a panel, not listening to his mother redraw the map. Kenneth kept glancing at the scotch he wasn't supposed to drink before 5, and then at the clock he wanted to move. Dorothy rested the folio on her lap, opened it, and read the language the way some people read prayers, without apology. The words were clean. I revoke. I bequeath. I appoint. Their edges cut through the room one by one until there was no soft place left to land. Mother, Patricia said softly, the softness that always came right before a burn. This is rash. This is grief talking. Grief tends to improve my clarity, Dorothy said, eyes on the page. When she looked up, the lake light caught the silver in her hair and turned it into a crown. It's all in order. I had 3 evaluations this week. Walter has the certifications. Walter inclined his head, stepping forward just enough to be a fact in a suit. Your mother's capacity is documented by independent physicians. The execution is valid under state law. Victoria made a small broken sound and pressed fingers to her lips. A tear slid with cinematic timing, catching the chandelier's light. She's not herself, she whispered. Can't you see? Rachel has been controlling her. Her gaze flicked to me, then back to the room, a plea calibrated for any lens. We barely see Grandma anymore. She's isolated. Rachel screens her calls, blocks visits. That is false, Walter said, tone dry as a stamped envelope. It's true, Victoria insisted, letting her voice tremble as if it had learned how in a mirror. She only listens to you now, Rachel. You've gotten in her head. We all know you've always wanted more than this family gave you. Gregory crossed his legs the other way, settling into the attorney he had never been. Mother, this is textbook undue influence. There will be a contest. He looked at Walter, then at me, with a thin smile that said he liked his chances in fights that could be won by tone. A court will agree. Dorothy turned a page, unbothered. You can't influence someone who sees through you. Kenneth exhaled a laugh, quick and sour. That's clever, Grandma. But this is radioactive. The board? The press? He gestured around the room as if reporters were hiding behind the ferns. You'll blow up the company to punish your daughter. I'm not punishing anyone, Dorothy said. I'm correcting a record. Patricia's composure frayed. Correcting? Her cheeks brightened. You're humiliating us. You're humiliating me. Pat, Gregory murmured. A palm up. Control. Dorothy closed the folio with a precise kiss of leather and paper. No, she said. You humiliated yourselves, in public, last night, and in private over years. I tolerated it. I excused it. I will not fund it. Victoria's mask slipped for a flash. Teeth. Then calculation restored. She pivoted toward me, eyes glassy. Rachel, be reasonable. You don't want this weight. You've never handled anything like this. Hand it back. Ask for... She blinked, reaching for a generous word and finding none that didn't bruise. Ask for enough. We'll be fair. A laugh rose in me and died there, a bird hitting glass. Your version of fair is a room where I'm allowed to watch you eat. She flinched, the wounded beast glance quick as a claw. Patricia shifted her chair back and leaned forward, hands together like a prayer that had learned to threaten. Honey, she said to Dorothy, but it landed on me. Do you understand what people will say? How this will look? A young woman with no experience manipulating an elderly billionaire. Elderly billionaire, Dorothy repeated, amused. You hear yourself selling headlines and you think that's the truth. She turned to me, the winter lake gentle. You're not manipulating me. You're reminding me who I meant to be. Gregory's voice hardened. We'll sue, he said, immediately. Of course you will, Dorothy said, like he had told her it would rain in Seattle. You've always preferred a contract to a conscience. Walter cleared his throat. Regardless, you should all be aware there is documented misappropriation concerning a trust designated for Miss Morgan. He didn't look at me, a kindness. Any contest would open discovery. The word landed like a trap snapping shut. Victoria stared at him. What, miss? Don't, Gregory said, quick. Dorothy's gaze swept the room, counting, weighing, measuring the things she had made and the people who held them. I asked you here to inform you, not to ask permission. She picked up a pen, dated a line as calmly as if she were signing for a package. Rachel is the heir to my shares and estate. The company will continue under a management team I trust. The foundation will expand. The rest of it, the parties and the optics, you can keep. Silence pooled. The clock ticked like a distant metronome, rehearsing someone else's song. Rain slicked the laurel leaves outside until the garden looked lacquered. I felt every muscle in my shoulders knot, then unknot, as if my body were learning a new grammar for standing my own height. Patricia's pearl bracelet snapped the quiet. She slapped it lightly against her wrist, once, twice, as if polishing patience. Then she leaned across the low table toward me and raked her gaze from my shoes to my mouth in a single dismissive sweep. You don't deserve her name, she hissed. You don't deserve. The movement was sudden and small and enormous. Her hand lifted and crossed the space between us, a flat line aimed to correct a child. The sound, skin, air, shock, cracked the room sharper than crystal breaking. Heat burst against my cheek, and for a second, the world narrowed to the red print where her palm had been. Patricia! Gregory barked, not because it was wrong, but because it was messy. Victoria gasped, one hand to her throat like a stage note. Kenneth whispered, Jesus, not like a prayer. My chair scraped backward. I held myself still. The urge to apologize came ancient and obedient, and I strangled it before it found my mouth. Dorothy rose with a slowness that contained all her decades of learning what slowness can do to a bully. Get out of my house. The words folded the air. They weren't loud. They were final. Patricia recoiled, as if the command had weight. Gregory stood, tried on indignation, realized it didn't fit. Kenneth hovered, calculating which door made him look least like a coward. Victoria's tears vanished between one blink and the next. "You can't throw your own family into the rain," Patricia said, already moving. "You did that yourselves," Dorothy replied. Walter opened the door. The hallway looked longer than it had an hour ago. Shoes scuffed. Coat sleeves slid on. No one met my eyes. As they passed, Victoria hissed, "This isn't over." The old family lullaby. When the door latched, the room exhaled. The rain sounded like applause from a far audience. Dorothy sat again, slower this time, and Walter brought her a glass of water, as if the simple act could dignify the entire species. My cheek throbbed in a quiet pulse. I pressed cool fingertips there and breathed. "You're not alone," Dorothy said. "That's what they hate." Walter checked his phone, frown knitting. "It appears they've moved quickly." "Of course they have," Dorothy said. "They always do." He turned the screen so we could see. A headline bloomed in midnight font over a bright, hungry page, already sprouting comments like mold and sugar. The news, heiress accused of manipulating elderly grandmother, spread all over social media. The next morning, front page of the Seattle Times. Young woman manipulates billionaire grandmother for fortune. The headline sat on my doorstep like a dead thing. Someone had tossed the paper so hard it half skimmed into the hydrangeas. Ink bled where the lawn was still wet. I picked it up with the tips of my fingers, carried it inside, and flattened it on the counter. The photo they used was a freeze frame from last night. Me half-turned, eyes narrowed against a camera flash. They made suspicion out of a blink. My apartment still smelled faintly of yeast from the bakery downstairs and the citrus cleaner I'd swiped across the counters at 2 a.m. The blinds were slanted against a watery sun. On the table, my laptop hummed, screen freckled with notifications that kept blooming no matter how fast I swatted them away. Anonymous emails, taggings, messages from people who wanted to save me, ruin me, or both. I clicked on one of my project boards out of reflex and watched a client's access vanish in real time. Then another. A third sent a terse message. "We're pausing the campaign until the situation is clarified." The situation. That's what they called lies when they were afraid of picking a side. My calendar thinned like a tree in winter. The doxing started with a thread that listed the cross streets of my building and described the color of my mailbox. By noon, a stranger knew the number I'd had since college and was calling to leave a meowing sound, then hanging up. 2 hours later, a different stranger called to tell me Jesus forgave me and I should give the money back. By 3, my portfolio site stuttered, then crashed, then revived with a new page someone had slapped on top, a black banner that read, golddigger.com, in a font trying too hard to be funny. I killed the domain connection with shaking hands, wiped the server, restored from a drive I'd hidden under my bed in a box marked taxes. Dorothy called at the exact moment I needed a voice that did not lift or drop with the tide. "You've seen it," she said, not asking. "I've seen everything," I said, pinching the bridge of my nose until tiny white sparks bloomed behind my eyes. "They're very industrious when the pitchforks come out." "You don't win with pitchforks," she said. Her tone had that unhurried cadence I'd come to recognize as the sound of someone who fights with calendars, not adrenaline. Let them think they've won. For now. My mouth dried. Silence looks like guilt. Sometimes silence screams louder than words, she said. Just make sure it's the kind that builds, not the kind that buries. Walter's on his way, and Thomas is bringing you something I showered to reset the shaking, and dressed in jeans and a sweater that didn't invite scrutiny, hair pulled back so my face had nothing to hide behind. When the buzzer rasped, I looked through the peephole out of habit, even though I knew Thomas would fill it like a well-tailored wardrobe. He lifted a small pelican case when I opened the door, the kind that says you expect trouble and plan for it. "May I?" he asked, stepping in as if to disturb as little air as possible. He set the case on the table, spun the clasps, and opened it to reveal a rugged hard drive nested in foam. "What is it?" I asked, though the answer had already started to hum through my nerves. "Years," he said. "Meeting videos, internal reviews, casual remarks that weren't meant for microphones but were, how do they put it? For the record." He glanced toward the window where a photographer's telephoto might be dreaming of my silhouette. "You should not watch them alone the first time." We waited for Walter to arrive before we plugged the drive in. He shook the rain off his coat and set his briefcase down with a sigh that sounded like work beginning. Thomas stood guard by the door, one ear for the hallway, one eye on the screen. I sat at my little table with my knees too close to the edge, hands flat so they wouldn't confess my nerves. The videos had timestamps organized by quarter. We clicked Q3, 5 years ago. A younger Gregory sat at a glass table, sleeves rolled, tie loose, an audience of 2 junior analysts and a consultant who kept saying optics. He laughed at an expense line and said, "You just put it under household. No one checks if the house is a person." The room laughed along. No one told him the house had a name. No one told him it was mine. We watched another clip. Patricia asked for a foundation slush for a gala table. "It's still charity if people see you giving," she said. Victoria came in late, kissed the air beside everyone's cheeks, chirped that Westbrook's bursar had cleared her despite a hiccup. And wasn't it nice when things worked themselves out? The camera caught her saying, "Rachel's so lucky to be in this family." And the consultant replied, "Well, luck is managed." I paused the video and stared at the frozen frame. I'd forgotten how much younger we all looked, because we had been. Youth had made me naive enough to believe that a closed door muffled intention. It didn't. It just gave it better acoustics. "Keep copies in triplicate," Walter said, already making a tree of folders on my desktop. "One for me, one for Dorothy, one off-site. Do not email any of this. Physical handoffs only." I thumbed the edge of the pelican case, grounding myself in plastic and hinge. "What do I do while they spit me into the comments?" "Document," Walter said. "Every threat, every hack attempt, every client note, and shore up your accounts with 2-factor that doesn't live on your phone." Thomas extended a small notebook, the kind that fits inside a pocket stitched with purpose. "For the analog things," he said, smiling slightly. "The internet forgets what paper remembers." By evening, the sky had found the color of old bruises. The bakery below had gone dark except for the red glow of a proofing light, and the apartment took on that hush that comes when a city exhales at the same time. I lined the drive's cables along the back of the table, taped them so I wouldn't trip, stacked the printed articles the way I had used to stack mood boards: subject, tone, threat. My phone lit with an unknown number. I let it vibrate through 2 rings before I answered, because courage is sometimes just the act of breathing twice. "Ms. Morgan," a woman said, honeyed but tired. Jennifer Cole, Seattle Scene. Do you have a minute? I swallowed the reflex to hang up. Reporters had been circling all day. Some had knocked with kindness like a battering ram. Briefly, I said. I'll be straight with you, she said. My editor wants your denial on record. The narrative's ugly, great for clicks, terrible for truth. What's the narrative now? I asked, moving to the window, watching tail lights smear into wet lines. That you used Dorothy's illness to get her signature, she said. They're saying you used her illness to get her signature. I closed my eyes. It was always illness with women. Any inconvenient decision explained by the body turning against itself. I saw Dorothy's clear gaze, steady as ledger stone. I remembered the tests, the stamps, the dates, her hand on mine. I tasted the bitterness that comes when a lie fits a fear. Do you want to comment? Jennifer asked softly. On or off record. I'm not here to trap you. I want to show you something, I said. I glanced back at the table, at the neat cables and the waiting folders, and Thomas's notebook with its first page already scrawled. The trembling in my hands had stilled. I touched the webcam perched on my laptop, angled it so the room behind me looked ordinary, because it was. Ordinary and real and mine. I sat, clicked the video icon, watched the small window bloom with my face, and lowered my voice so it carried where it needed to go. Rachel looks straight into the webcam lens, whispers, "Then I'll show them the truth." A week of being criticized on social media, phone calls from unknown numbers. I blocked all comments, only turned on notifications from Dorothy and Thomas. The mansion had given me a loan of quiet, and I was paying it back with discipline. I turned the library into a war room. Legal pads stacked like sandbags, a whiteboard crowded with dates and arrows, my laptop perched on the big desk where Dorothy once signed checks that kept hundreds of people fed. Outside, the rain stitched the windows shut. Inside, the screen threw its cold blue across the wood, a midnight aquarium full of swimming tabs, bank records, scans, chain of custody logs. Walter arrived with a binder that looked capable of being entered into evidence simply by existing. He didn't sit until every page had a place. Checklist, he said, like a surgeon announcing instruments. Medical. 3 independent physicians, Dr. Sue, Dr. Bennett, Dr. Alvarez. Capacity confirmed with full cognitive panels. Financial. The $750,000 statement set, the disbursement trail to Westbrook tuition, and the household payments. Witnesses. Thomas, who was present for critical meetings, and a former accounting coordinator at the foundation willing to testify to Patricia's gala slush. We're adding one of Gregory's junior analysts who wants whistleblower protections. He laid the letters out in a neat fan, official letterheads, stamps raised like braille under my thumb. My breath unknotted a fraction. They're going to say I planned this, I said, that I circled her until she gave in. Walter didn't argue with feelings. He straightened a plastic tab until it gleamed. Facts. Lines on timelines. Signatures that match. We anchor the story to paper and time. Thomas brought a tray, Earl Grey and something that steamed like forgiveness. We'll use the small office, he said, the one without street-facing windows. He had already rolled in a locking file cart and labeled its drawers, originals, certified copies, working sets. Next, Walter said, your business audit. You said you wanted an independent firm. Yes, I answered. Full forensic. Contracts, invoicing, payroll, the works. If there's a typo in a memo header from 3 years ago, I want it found by us. I pulled the authorization letter forward, reread the clause about access, and signed. My hand didn't shake. Every rumor about my fake company would hit a wall of third-party verification. If I was going to ask the world to look, I would give it something clean to see. Dorothy watched from the settee, a blanket at her knees, the kind of stillness that comes from conserving energy for the precise swing. "Good," she said, when the pen left the paper. "Now, your 90 seconds." I looked up. "What 90 seconds?" "The ones you will have when cameras crowd a room and someone points at your face," she said. "You don't have to explain your soul. You tell them the facts. No adjectives, no autobiography. Take away the room they have to invent." She folded her hands. "Say your name, your work, the documentation. End with what you're doing next. Then stop." "I'll babble," I said. "I'll try to answer questions that aren't questions." "That's why we rehearse," Dorothy said, a general with a teacup. "Stand. Breathe low." Again, Thomas set his phone timer for 90 seconds. I stood, palms open, and began. "My name is Rachel Morgan. I run a design studio in Seattle. 3 independent physicians certified Dorothy Hayes' capacity in the weeks before the will was executed." My voice wanted to explain, to apologize, to build a bridge back to people who had burned it for kindling. I cut the impulse like a wire. Walter raised a hand. "You're drifting into defense." "Just the facts, no excuses." Again. "My name is Rachel Morgan. I run a design studio in Seattle. 3 physicians certified Dorothy Hayes' capacity. We have financial records proving misappropriation from a trust established in my name and managed by Gregory Morgan. An independent auditor is reviewing my company. We will present this to the court. We respect the process." The timer chimed. 90 seconds, bare and bright. "Better," Dorothy said, and I felt that rare warmth that isn't flattery but recognition. When the room tries to make you smaller, you stand on nouns. We moved into the small office. Thomas installed a shredder whose teeth sang when fed. Walter photographed each original with a date-stamped scanner, slid it into an acid-free sleeve, and logged it twice. We were building a fortress out of paper. By midnight, my inbox had turned into a swamp again. Anonymous accounts belched certainty. I was a parasite, a thief, a witch, a blank that the censors would not print. I kept the windows narrow, the words contained. We did not answer. We organized. At 1 a.m., the email arrived. The subject line tried to be clever. "A little sunshine." The body was a single sentence, cruelly polite. "Back off the will, or we release your private photos. You know the ones." There was a compressed attachment I did not open. Instead, I printed the email to PDF, sent it to Walter via the secure channel he'd established, and wrote the time and my pulse in the notebook Thomas had handed me 2 days ago. "People who threaten first usually forged second," Walter said, reading over my shoulder. "Even if there are photos, consent matters, context matters, and extortion always matters more. We handle this with the same calm." Calm. The word sat like a stone I could stand on. Dorothy leaned forward. "Listen to me," she said, voice low. "If you wrestle in the mud, you lose, even when you win. We don't play their game." "I know," I said, biting the inside of my cheek until the taste of iron insisted I was here, not online. "I won't wrestle in the mud. I'll turn on the floodlights." "Good," Dorothy murmured. "Light doesn't haggle." We drafted a statement for the auditor's start date, scheduled the notarizations for the medical affidavits, and picked a time to record my 90 seconds with a neutral backdrop. Walter gathered the binder. Thomas checked the garden cameras on his phone and the entry logs for oddities. The rain relented to a hush, and the blue of the monitor faded as the screen finally slept. My phone buzzed one last time. Another unknown number. Another message that wanted to own my breath. I silenced it. I had chosen which voices were allowed inside my walls tonight. Dorothy rose, slow but certain, and crossed the small space between us. She steadied one hand on the desk, the other on my shoulder. The room smelled of tea and printer ink and rain that had done all the talking it could. She held my gaze until my panic lowered its volume, until my spine remembered it had a purpose beyond keeping me upright. Her face was fierce and tender at once, a map with the roads she'd taken marked in ink no storm could wash away. She didn't need to raise her voice to fill the room. Dorothy looked straight at me. If they want to drag us down into the mud, we'll bring the floodlights with us. Inside information leaked. Victoria hired a private investigator, PI. I discovered he had been in contact with my old client. The coffee shop across from Seattle's scene smelled like wet coats, paper ink, and beans roasted to the edge of bitterness. Rain combed the windows into vertical lines. Keyboards clicked in quick bursts, a shared metronome for people trying to outrun headlines. I took the corner table facing the door so I could see who was coming and who wished they hadn't. Jennifer slid into the seat opposite, hair damp, eyes alert. "Full disclosure," she said, cupping her coffee with both hands. I was skeptical. The narrative prints itself. Young woman, old money, sick matriarch. But the more I read the filings you sent, the less the headline fits. "I'm not asking for sympathy," I said. "I'm asking for accuracy, and I'm asking you to see the pieces we haven't published yet." Thomas appeared with the timing of a stage cue, placed a slim folder on the table, and stood half a step behind me. Jennifer opened it and exhaled a low, astonished sound. Inside, a forwarded email chain from an address we'd traced to Victoria's assistant. Subject line, draft, Rachel talking points. The tone was sticky and bright, the content a smear kit. Seed, illness. Push, isolation. Lean hard on, adopted owes everything. The kicker was the send history. Misaddressed, recalled, resent, then panicked, deleted. Jennifer's mouth tilted wryly. They always confuse PR with truth. She tapped the footer. "This is gold." "It proves intent." "It proves strategy," Thomas corrected gently. "Truth requires receipts." I reached into my bag and placed a thumb drive on the folder. "Then here are some receipts. From the drive you asked me about, Thomas's delivery." I kept my voice low. "Gregory's lobby logs at the bank. Off-the-record context for now. Meetings where household lines are discussed like expandable fabric. You'll see dates that rhyme with the trust withdrawals." Jennifer's eyes flicked to mine. "I'll treat this like nitroglycerin." She leaned in. "There's chatter a press conference is coming." "It is," I said. "I want you in the room as an independent journalist. No embargoes, no pre-approved questions. Watch what happens when facts stand next to theater." Her smile thinned into something like respect. "I'll be there, but you know they're escalating." As if cued, my phone buzzed. An unknown address, a PDF. I hesitated, then opened it with the detachment Walter had trained into me. An invoice, itemized, from a small investigations firm whose letterhead tried too hard. Bill to V. Morgan. Services, social media scrape, client interviews, background moral profile. Status, overdue. The email body. Please forward to appropriate party for settlement. No greeting, no signature, no shame. My stomach went cold, then steady. The P I had been fishing my past for rot and, finding none, had decided to fish for payment instead. Thomas scanned the invoice with a quick, efficient glance. That address, he murmured, pointing at the reply to. Roots through a personal domain. Not company, he's freelancing the threat. Jennifer watched our faces, then the screen. He sent the bill to you? By accident, I said. Or on purpose, depending on who he thinks will answer. I angled the phone so she could read. Her eyebrows rose. That's desperate, she said. Or useful, I answered. When lies don't pay their bills, truth collects. We sat with that for a beat, the rain stitching the window, the shop speakers whispering an old soul track like a memory we all almost had. Jennifer slid the PR draft back into the folder and tucked it into her tote. I'll verify everything before I print, she said. But this is a pattern. It is, I said. And patterns survive sunlight worse than people do. She left to make her deadline. Thomas and I stayed, watching passers-by blur into the gray. I typed a note to myself about the PI's domain and forwarder, then saved the invoice to the secure drive. The keys under my fingers felt like a metronome that finally matched my pulse. I text Walter. We have a witness motivated by unpaid invoices. Walter, bring him in. Hayes Biotech Headquarters, 20th floor lobby. Cameras, lights, company logo behind long table. Dorothy appears in a white suit. The glass room framed Elliott Bay like a solemn painting. Low clouds pressed to the water. Fairies carving pale seams. Gulls like commas in a sentence not yet finished. Rows of chairs faced the long table. Tripods bristled. Red tally lights glowed. Walter moved with a stage manager's precision, placing stacks of blue-bound documents in the center, a pen aligned at perfect right angles to the edge. My pre-printed 90-second statement lay on crisp paper, corners squared. Dorothy took her seat in white. Not surrender, not softness, clarity. Walter stepped to the mic. Good afternoon, he said, voice tuned for microphones and doubt. Before any questions, we will establish 3 facts. He lifted the first blue volume. 3 independent physicians, Dr. Sue, Dr. Bennett, Dr. Alvarez, evaluated Ms. Hayes' capacity in the weeks prior to execution of her will. They each certified full capacity. He set the book down with a soft, public thud. Second, a timeline of execution with witnesses and notarization. Another book, another measured thud. Third, contemporaneous communications corroborating intent. He looked up. We are here to frame facts, not attack individuals. Dorothy leaned in, the white suit catching the cloudy light, and the room fell forward to meet her. Inheritance should reward character, not entitlement, she said. each word clean enough to stand on. I chose my heir for character, not blood. She let the sentence rest where it landed. I built Hayes Biotech with people who kept promises. Rachel Morgan keeps hers, silence bent, then held. I could feel the paper of my statement warm under my palms. I stood, counted the breath Dorothy had taught me to count, and looked not at the cameras but through them. My name is Rachel Morgan, I said. I run a design studio in Seattle. 3 physicians certified Dorothy Hayes' capacity. We have financial records proving misappropriation from a trust in my name managed by Gregory Morgan. An independent auditor is reviewing my company. I just want a family that listens. The last line left me and hung there, and the room did what living rooms never had. It listened. Hands shot up. Walter pointed, choosing the order in which noise would be allowed. A man near the aisle took it as permission to stand. "Did you isolate her from her family?" he shouted, his voice trying to smuggle accusation in as curiosity. "Multiple sources claim you controlled access. Phone, visits, timeline," Walter said, already moving to the screen. The far wall bloomed with an email grid, the kind of archive only a meticulous grandmother and a good IT department can make. "These are Ms. Hayes' outgoing birthday emails to her family for the last 5 years, he said. All staff calendar invites for gatherings at this very building. Photographs attached. Click. Dorothy at a long table, laughter mid-flight, Patricia leaning in, Victoria's champagne held high, Kenneth's hand on Gregory's shoulder. Click. A lakefront barbecue, everyone sunburned and smug. Click. A winter party, Dorothy in the same white suit, a grandchild tearing ribbon while Victoria filmed. Note the recipients, Walter said, laser pointer dotting the CC line. Everyone is included. Note the responses. The thread expanded. Can't wait. We'll be there. What can we bring? My name in the to line, not the BCC. Allegations of isolation are inconsistent with documented behavior, Walter concluded. Miss Hayes kept her family close, even when they did not keep her values. A woman in the front row half raised her hand without waiting. Ms. Morgan, are you saying there's no estrangement? I'm saying facts matter, I answered. Estrangement doesn't usually buy matching sweaters and smile at catered shrimp. A few reporters hid their grins behind phones. Walter didn't smile, but the corner of his mouth acknowledged the room's temperature change. Jennifer Cole, front row center, didn't ask a question. She wrote. I could see the rhythm in her hand, short, long, long, short, as if she were notating the way the story had stopped fitting its headline. Dorothy sat without fidgeting, the way people sit when they know their spine is not up for negotiation. The blue books waited, patient, certain of their ink. Another question. Miss Hayes, why now? Dorothy answered without looking at the cameras. Because time is a luxury, and I refuse to spend it financing cruelty. Murmurs rippled. Pens caught up. We moved through 2 more queries, procedural mostly. Walter redirecting. Me returning to nouns instead of apologies. The room settled into that rare press conference hush when performance hasn't found a foothold. I felt something unfamiliar rise in me. The sensation of being heard without being edited. The door to the press conference room is pushed open. The sound of high heels on the stone floor. Victoria appears. Victoria, mascara smudged, hands shaking but voice shrill. "She brainwashed my grandmother!" Camera turns, microphone pointed straight. The room jolted, like someone had kicked a cable. Security stepped from the walls, hands folded, eyes sharp. The red tally light swung to Victoria as if the cameras themselves smelled blood. She planted herself at the aisle mic, shoulders squared, fury lacquered over panic. "You all think she's a saint?" she spat, jabbing a finger toward me. "She moved in and shut us out. She poisoned my grandmother against her own family." Walter didn't look rattled. He adjusted his glasses and kept breathing like an accountant counting to truth. Dorothy remained seated, white suit immaculate, gaze steady. I felt my pulse slow the way it does when you realize the bridge you're on is steel, not rope. "We raised her for 22 years. She deserves to get paid!" Victoria screamed. Pens froze. A reporter 2 rows back lifted his microphone. "Paid? For what?" "For everything!" Victoria snapped. "Food, clothes, a room. Do you know what that costs?" She acts like she's owed the world. Her voice cracked, then vaulted into a higher register. "We covered it for 2 decades. That money? That was our reimbursement." "What money?" the same reporter pressed. No heat, just a scalpel. Victoria pivoted, eyes glittering. $750,000 for her. That's ours." The sentence hung, the way a bell hangs after you hit it, the note traveling farther than the hand that struck it. You could hear shoe leather shift, a throat clear, the camera iris tighten. Even the bay outside seemed to hold its breath. Walter stepped to the side mic with the patience of a man watering a fire. "Thank you for the public confirmation of the trust for Rachel," he said evenly. A few heads whipped, realizing what had just been placed, gift-wrapped, into the record. Victoria blinked, understanding arriving like cold air. "No, wait, I didn't mean—" She lunged for the nearest microphone. A security guard slid smoothly between, palm out in a gesture that said both "no" and "it's over" at once. The cameras followed her face, catching the smear of mascara, the twist of her mouth, the feral calculation as she searched for a softer exit, and found only doors marked evidence. "You didn't raise me. You monetized me," I said. Not loud, but clear enough for the boom mics to choose it over her next flail. Some reporters flinched like they'd felt it land. Dorothy did not move. She didn't need to. Her silence framed the scene like parentheses around a confession. Walter turned to the gallery. "To clarify, the trust was designated for Miss Morgan's education and care. Disbursements to other recipients are misappropriation under statute. We will provide documents after." He gestured, and staff in company badges carried boxes to a side table, index tabs visible, dates clean, copies ready. Victoria twisted toward the back of the room as if a sympathetic editor might materialize and edit reality. "She's manipulating all of you," she shrieked. But the microphones had learned which voice told time and which voice screamed about it. A boom operator murmured, "Got it," to no one in particular. A camera beeped as its card hit capacity. I watched the idea unmake itself on Victoria's face, saw the instant when the rehearsal script slipped, and the math of consequences finally balanced. Jennifer, front row, kept writing, eyes flicking between the box labels and Victoria's unraveling, the way a storm chaser tracks both the funnel and the pressure drop. She didn't ask a question. She didn't need to. The answer was running hot and unfiltered at the microphone stand. Security guided Victoria toward the door, calm as ushers. Her heels clacked a staccato retreat on the stone, the rhythmless music of a plan coming apart. Jennifer's phone vibrates. Breaking. Victoria Morgan admits spending adoptees' trust fund. Hashtag Trust for Rachel starts trending. Social media analytics graph pops up. Sentiment shifts from negative to positive by the hour. Email from client. We're back on. The line climbed like a tide chart finally obeying the moon. Green bars overtook red. Comments stopped hissing and began to parse. And an old client's subject line landed like a steadying hand. We're back on. Below it, another. We never doubted you. Timeline? I exhaled through a laugh that didn't quite know how to be happy and forwarded everything to Walter with the analytics screenshot attached. Inheritance rewards character, Dorothy murmured from the sofa in Walter's office, a blanket over her knees, color pale but gaze exact. Society is confirming it. Walter capped a marker and turned to the whiteboard where arrows and dates braided. Will signing. 3 blue-bound medical certificates. The press conference. A still of Victoria at the mic, mouth open around the number that undid her. We consolidate, then move, he said. Thomas, originals? Thomas set a hard case on the table. Primary camera angle, room audio, redundant feed, he said crisply. Chain of custody logs signed. The wall-mounted TV flickered to a daytime set where Kenneth sat in a soft chair trying too hard to look softer. He clasped his hands, wore regret like a pressed pocket square. We were not perfect siblings, he told the host, tone tuned to confessional. But this? Cutting family out? The host cut in, voice pleasant, question sharp. Did your college tuition receive funds from a trust designated for Rachel Morgan? Kenneth blinked. A beat. 2. That's family accounting, he tried, a smile that couldn't find its landing gear. Is that a yes? The host pressed gently. Kenneth glanced off camera. The feed wavered. A producer's voice slithered through the audio like a warning. We have to go to break, the host said brightly. When the show returned, Kenneth's chair was empty. Walter didn't smile. He wrote, Optics not equals facts on the board, and drew an arrow to a folder labeled Exhibits. We file for expedite now, he said. We attach Victoria's on-record admission, the physician letters, the timeline, and the threats. A court prefers order to spectacle. He drafted, I initialed. Dorothy signed with a hand that trembled only when the pen left the page. The courier left with a sleeve of stamped envelopes. Before the elevator could swallow him, I called Jennifer. If they come for you over the story, I said, we'll go on record together. Noted, she said. Also, your 90 seconds made my editor shut up mid-sentence. That never happens. My phone vibrated with a court notification. Walter opened the email, skimmed, and let his voice go flat to keep it steady. Accepted, he read. Early trial date granted. A second buzz. Unknown number. If the court won't stop you, we will. No signature. No punctuation. A threat that mistook anonymity for power. Thomas's jaw set. We'll escalate security at the house, he said. Route your calls through the new filter. No deliveries without verification. Dorothy coughed into a linen handkerchief. The sound was small and decisive, like a door quietly closing down a hallway. Her hands shook. The nap of the blanket trembled. We're almost there, she said, and gave me a smile that lived more in the eyes than the mouth. I crossed to her. the room tilting with the sudden gravity of all we'd stacked on this table. Ink and timelines and the thin bridges between. The fourth stand beside her sofa whispered when she shifted. The clear line into her arm flashed a bubble that rose and popped. The internet forgives slowly, but it recognizes the truth fast. I held that sentence the way you hold a railing in a storm, and looked at the needle, bright beneath her skin, and knew the clock we were racing wasn't only the courts. The King County courtroom was packed. The prosecution, Morgan family, the defense, me, and attorney Walter. Dorothy sat in the front row clutching her cane. Benches creaked, coats whispered, and rain ticked the high windows like a patient stenographer. Judge Langford took the bench with the exacting calm of a metronome. The bailiff's call settled the room. I felt Dorothy's presence behind my shoulder like a lighthouse beam. Fainter now, but steady. "We're almost there," she had said. I held the words the way you hold a coin in your fist before a toll gate. Opposite us, Patricia wore piety like a pressed dress. Gregory practiced disappointment. Kenneth polished neutrality. Victoria's mouth trembled just enough for cameras that weren't allowed inside. Their counsel rose, voice burnished for accusation. "Undue influence," he began, letting the phrase walk in first. "A vulnerable elder, isolated, signature obtained under sway." Exhibit numbers rattled like sabers. The story threaded itself into a familiar noose. Walter didn't rush. He stood with a binder whose spine had already convinced other rooms. "Your Honor," he said. 3 files. He held up the first, blue-bound. Medical capacity, Dr. Sue, Dr. Bennett, Dr. Alvarez. Each evaluation within weeks of execution. Full cognitive panels. No impairment. He placed it on the evidence cart. Second, financial tracing of a trust designated for Ms. Morgan's care and education, managed by Gregory Morgan, depleted to $0 through disbursements that correlate with Westbrook University tuition and household expenses. Certified statements, chain of custody intact. The second binder landed. Third, testimonial. On-record admission by Victoria Morgan during last week's press event. He nodded to the clerk. We moved to play the clip. Speakers coughed to life. The room filled with the unmistakable acoustics of a large glass space and a voice ratting too high. Victoria, on screen, mascara blurred. 750,000 for her. That's ours. The sentence rang off the walls and then seemed to keep ringing somewhere behind my ribs. Truth doesn't need to shout. It echoes. I felt, more than saw, the shift. Attorneys' pens pausing, a jurist's eyebrow tilting, the smallest exhale turning tide. The state seal above the bench looked suddenly less like decoration and more like a weight. Opposing counsel sputtered. Context, stress, misinterpretation. But the words slid off an audio waveform that didn't care about shame. Walter lifted a hand. We have the full transcript, Your Honor, and the chain from camera to archive. We also offer corroborating timelines of trust withdrawals synchronized to defendants' expenditures. Judge Langford adjusted his glasses, eyes on the monitor as the clip replayed at lower volume, then stilled. This will be entered, he said. He glanced at the clock, then over the room, weighing law against theater. 5 minutes, he ordered. Silence in the courtroom while the court takes full legal video evidence. Sound drained away. Even the rain seemed to listen. In that hush, I could hear Dorothy's cane tap once against the bench. A quiet, Amen. I kept my eyes forward. Gregory stared at the table. Patricia studied the floor as if it might offer a kinder statute. Kenneth's jaw worked a useless argument. Victoria stared at her own mouth on the screen like it had betrayed her for the last time. The clerk marked the exhibit, time-stamped, sealed. Walter rested his hand on the binder, not triumphant, just certain. I let my breath out slow. The silence did more than any speech we could have given. It turned evidence into gravity. When the 5 minutes ended, the room inhaled as one body. Judge Langford nodded, notes precise. "Proceed," he said, and the word felt like a gate swinging open. Behind me, a soft, ragged sound. Dorothy coughs, blood seeping onto a tissue. She smiles at me. Justice sounds beautiful, doesn't it? 3 days later, text message. Verdict today, 2 p.m. My heart was pounding like a drum. By noon, the courthouse steps had grown their usual crop of cameras. The sky held a thin winter sun. Gold poured through glass like a promise that might keep. In the corridor outside Department 7, Dorothy's hand settled on my arm, lighter than it had been, warm still. I remembered the red bloom on her tissue in court and felt time breathing down our necks. We filed in. The room had that sanctified quiet of places where words become architecture. Judge Langford arrived precisely on the minute, robe falling into place like a final draft. He glanced over the notes, over us, over a stack of blue-bound records that had learned to speak for themselves. The court has reviewed the evidence, including medical certifications of capacity, the timeline of execution, and financial documentation regarding the trust designated for Ms. Rachel Morgan. He began, voice even, nothing ornamental. The court dismisses the entire lawsuit. Dorothy Hayes' will is valid. It was not a shout. It didn't need to be. The sentence landed like a plumb line. Air moved. A sob somewhere was bitten back. A pen rolled and hit wood. Walter's shoulder relaxed by a degree visible only to someone who'd watched him breathe for weeks. Langford continued, turning a page. Further, on the matter of misappropriation, the court orders Patricia and Gregory Morgan to return $750,000 plus interest accrued to Miss Rachel Morgan. He set the order down. Restitution scheduled to be filed within 10 days. Justice isn't revenge. It's balance. The words crossed my mind the way a hand finds a railing at the top of the stairs. I didn't cheer. I didn't exhale loudly. I just let my spine remember its job. To my left, Victoria burst into tears, big, jagged, camera-proof. Patricia staggered as though a step had been removed from beneath her. Her pearls clacked softly against each other, a broken metronome. Gregory bowed his head, not in prayer but in math, the kind that counts assets and losses and finally runs out of numbers. Kenneth stayed silent, jaw set to stone, the gentleman mask abandoned in a chair backstage. Outside the windows, late light slid down the facades across 3rd Avenue and painted the blinds with stripes. Dorothy squeezed my fingers. "Look at me," she said, and I did. "You didn't win because you fought. You won because you didn't become them." The line hit somewhere beneath my ribs where the child I'd been still sometimes sat, knees up, waiting for permission to take up air. I nodded because words would rip if I used them. The judge stood. We stood. The room dissolved into fabric sounds and methodical footsteps. Reporters waited at the threshold where the law ended and theater resumed. Walter angled us past the crush with practiced grace. Thomas cleared a human corridor with nothing more than a look, and the polite insistence of someone who knows his job is to get you home. The car door shut out the noise. Seattle's 4 p.m. light had turned copper. The skyline looked like a row of coins. Dorothy's breath was shallow but steady. She turned my palm upright and set something small and familiar into it, her signet ring, warm from her skin. "Alone," she whispered. "The name is yours already." "We can go straight home," I told Thomas, and he nodded. The driver pulled into traffic. The world outside slid by in slow, burnished smears. Dorothy's eyes drifted to the window, to the bay, to something I couldn't see. From the front seat, Walter called our next steps over his shoulder. The certified copies, the transfer notices, the foundation's board calendar. His words floated like scaffolding we would climb tomorrow. Today could be a room with no tasks. I looked back at Dorothy to tell her, but her lashes had lowered. A small cough shivered through her. Her mouth softened as if into sleep. "We're almost there," she had said. We were, and also we weren't. Her fingers slackened around mine, the gentlest untying. She exhaled once, long, final, grateful. She faints in the car leaving. Her hand gently lets go. The ring falls. News spreads across the media. Court rules in favor of Rachel Morgan. I became a symbol of late justice. By morning, the headline had multiplied on bus shelters, in push alerts, in the soft buzz of conversations over coffee. Cameras didn't camp outside my building anymore. They drifted, then turned toward newer fires. Seattle wore spring rain like a veil. Streets rinsed, light tentative. At Madison Park, the house felt bigger without Dorothy's footsteps. Heating low, curtains drawn halfway. Her chair squared to the window as if still waiting for the lake to report. The ring I'd caught in the car lay in my palm, warm only because I refused to let it cool. A circle of gold with her initials, now a compass. Thomas moved quietly through the rooms, opening vents, murmuring to the staff with the hush reserved for churches and museums. On the foyer console, he set a bowl for keys and a stack of condolence cards that had begun to arrive too fast to answer. He didn't say, "Are you okay?" He polished the questions into tea and soup and silence. Walter came with folders and fewer words than usual. "Next steps," he said softly, tapping a page. Then, after a pause, "Later." He'd already filed the transfer notices, prepared the foundation documents, scheduled the board. Today he sat and watched the rain travel the glass like careful handwriting. When his phone vibrated, he stepped into the hall. Returning, his voice was flat in that way that keeps rage from spilling. "Federal inquiry opened," he said. "IRS is reviewing disbursements tied to the trust. Patricia and Gregory are on the list. I imagined receipts exhumed box by box. A ledger waking up and pointing. The world punished them. Life entrusted me." Jennifer knocked as if asking permission from memory. She wore no camera today, only a raincoat and the look of someone who knows when to leave the notepad in her bag. At the door, she lifted a small handheld mic, the battered one she'd carried since her first stringer gig. "I'm not here to record," she said, "only to return this." She set it on the console, a relic retiring. "Thank you for the truth." No speech, just a small bow to what data and backbone can do. News chimed all afternoon. A press release from a network announcing that Victoria's development deal had been mutually concluded. Then a court notice about a creditor's petition. Then a photo. Victoria at a lobby ATM, hair unbrushed, fury inherited but suddenly out of fashion. Her agent's statement spun, then collapsed. Kenneth's social feeds went quiet. Patricia's favorite columnist ran a piece about recalibrating grace, a phrase that managed not to say the word restitution at all. By evening, the rooms cooled into the kind of quiet that makes memory loud. I went to Dorothy's room and sat on the edge of her bed, palm on the quilt where the weight used to be. On the nightstand, a small cedar box waited, hinged like a promise. Inside, a square of paper folded twice, edges softened from being handled. Her handwriting slanted with the confidence of a woman who never needed to erase. Build something that heals. I pressed the note to my sternum where the ache had made its home. The foundation plan bloomed behind my eyes. The pro bono legal desks, the emergency apartments, the scholarships with no small print. The ring warmed again. Perhaps it was only my skin. Perhaps that is what inheritance really is. Warmth you choose to keep moving. The phone rang, not a buzz from a stranger, not a number to block. Thomas's line from the hospital wing we'd kept on standby. I answered, and the air changed at the first syllable. The nurse spoke gently, as if laying a hand on a bedside. Time, she said, and then didn't say the rest. I didn't ask for the exact minute. I didn't need to know which second had carried her across. In the doorway, Thomas nodded once. He already knew. Walter lowered his eyes and stood, the way you do when a judge enters and the law is grief. Rain thickened, the lake darkened, and the city went on with its electric murmurs as if an empire hadn't just moved into a different tense. I turned the ring on my finger until the initials aligned with mine. The room answered with a kind of hush that wasn't absence, but assignment. Somewhere a gull cried. Somewhere a printer spat out an audit request that would not be denied. I lay back and looked up into the dim ceiling, the past steady under my ribs like a plank. You kept your promise, Grandma. Now it's my turn. Private funeral at Madison Cemetery. No bright flowers, just the smell of rain and white lilies. Mist threaded the cedars like pale ribbon. A handful of black umbrellas leaned into the breeze, their ribs ticking softly, as if keeping time with our breaths. The lake lay muted and pewter beyond the low stone wall. Gulls circled once, decided against theatrics, and drifted on. We stood close, Thomas at my right, Walter at my left. A few former Hayes biotech employees whose hands showed the honest wear of work. Far off near the iron gate, the Morgans clustered beneath two glossy umbrellas, barred from entering. Their silence not reverence, but logistics. I stepped forward, rain stippling the paper in my hand, and looked at the simple casket. The words came the way Dorothy liked them, unadorned, exact. She didn't give me money. She gave me a mirror to see who I could be. I folded the page. She taught me that justice isn't revenge, it's balance. That you don't need to raise your voice when the truth will echo for you. A murmur of wind moved through the lilies, releasing a green, living scent. Thomas pressed a hand to my shoulder, the grip you give a ship while it moors. Walter cleared his throat, then chose stillness instead. Behind us, the former lab manager whispered a memory about Dorothy walking the factory floor at midnight to thank the third shift by name. Another recalled the day she stopped a meeting to ask the janitor for advice. He had the answer, and she implemented it. As the minister closed his book, my phone vibrated once, a metallic insect in my coat. An email. Subject line tidy, a request for forgiveness. Patricia had written it in the neutral cadence of a press release. Grief, misunderstanding, the hope that time might soften positions. At the end, a single syllable. Please. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred, then slipped the phone away. Forgiveness is the quietest form of justice. Dorothy would have said to spend it like a currency that only buys good things. I nodded to Thomas. Could you fetch the foundation paperwork from the car? He went at once, returning with a slim folder and a pen that had signed so many necessary endings and beginnings. Under the tense, dim light, I filled in the figure. $750,000. The memo line I wrote slowly, every letter its own vow. The Dorothy Hayes Foundation, in honor of the Morgan family. The sum would launch a new fund for adopted children in crisis. Legal aid, emergency housing, tuition without small print. I handed the document to Walter. Rain brightened his lashes. He blinked and did not look away from the page. That's not mercy, Rachel. That's legacy, he said, voice unsteady in the smallest, bravest way. I asked the employees to place a single lily each, and they did, palms lingering a second on the wood. Across the way, Gregory shifted, perhaps recognizing a ledger being balanced without his pen. Patricia's umbrella trembled. Victoria turned her face, unready for an audience without microphones. I felt no triumph, only a deep, anchoring quiet, the kind that allows a life to be built, rather than a point to be scored. The groundsman lowered the casket. The rope sang and went still. I knelt to press Dorothy's ring to the stone edge, cold against my skin, then slid it back on, the initials aligning with mine like a compass point. Thomas closed his umbrella over us, and the world gentled by 2 degrees. In the hush, I could almost hear Dorothy's dry laugh, the way she'd have teased me for choosing white lilies. Predictable, but correct. We drifted toward the path. I paused before the marker, rain beating on granite, and traced the letters that made a life into a line. Dorothy Hayes, 1945 to 2024. Justice is grace. 1 year later, Seattle Voice magazine publishes From Betrayal to Benevolence, the Rachel Morgan story. The issue lay open on the welcome desk beneath a small vase of daisies, but the real headline was on our walls. Photos in soft frames, each with a first name and a year. Children and teens whose lives had bent toward safety. Morning light poured through the glass doors and found the steel letters of our sign, the Dorothy Hayes Foundation, turning them briefly to gold. In the atrium, donors mingled with caseworkers and the first class of scholarship recipients, shoulders easy, voices low, like a family adjusting to a bigger table. I stood on the small riser we used for orientations and glanced at Thomas, who was checking the program with the same focus he once used for security plans. Jennifer, now our communications director, moved through the crowd without a recorder, greeting people by name. Near the entry, a shadow box hung beside Dorothy's portrait. Inside, her signet ring rested on indigo velvet, a tiny compass stilled at due north. Thomas had mounted it that morning and stepped back, the way you do when you've set a cornerstone. When the room quieted, I raised the mic. Every story deserves a table where respect is served. It was the line we'd written on our first grant application, the one that made a skeptical board member look up and say, "Show me." So we had. Today, we were opening 3 more emergency apartments, doubling our legal clinic hours, and announcing a partnership with the community college system for full-ride placements. No small print, no asterisks, no "be practical" used as a synonym for "be smaller." We brought 2 scholarship recipients forward, Aiden, who'd rebuilt his senior year after a foster disruption, and Lila, who'd arrived with a backpack and a drawing tablet, and now had a portfolio that could stop a room. The applause that followed wasn't loud. It was warm. In the second row, a little girl in a red raincoat twisted the strap of her mother's tote and stared at Dorothy's portrait as if the painted eyes might blink. She tugged free, marched up to me with brave knees, and asked, "Were you adopted too?" "Yes," I said, crouching so my voice didn't have to climb. "And I was loved, finally." Her shoulders settled. She nodded like a small executive satisfied with a report and returned to her mother. Somewhere to my left, Jennifer wiped at an eye and pretended it was the lighting. Thomas adjusted the shadow box by the tiniest fraction and smiled at the ring as if it might wink back. I spoke of what we had learned, that paperwork can be armor, that kindness is a policy, not a mood, that balance is a kind of justice you can build day by day, invoice by invoice, heart by heart. Behind me, a slide cycled through numbers. Cases closed, credits earned, nights slept safely. That felt less like metrics than like proof that grief can be persuaded to work for the living. The sound of applause mixed with the morning light pouring through the glass doors. I let it wash over me. Not as a verdict, but as weather. Evidence of a climate we were making together. In the hush that followed, I looked at Dorothy's ring, at the names on the wall, at the door opening for the next family, and spoke the thing I had been carrying for a year. I didn't win against them. I won against what they made me believe I was. Family is who stays when everyone else leaves.